Welcome to Classics Confidential, on location on the beautiful island of Cyprus. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Dimitris Tziovas from the University of Birmingham. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you. You talked in your paper at this wonderful conference about the perspective of modern Greek poets on the classical past and how it differs from some other Western movements such as post-colonialism, feminism, etc. What do you think is distinctive about modern Greek poets' approach to the classical past?
Yes, what I was trying to do in my paper, but also it's something that really puzzles me, is to identify different perspectives by the Greek poets on the classical past. And what I'm trying to do is to see different uses of the past in the poems, but also more generally the attitude to the past. Is it an attitude of, let's say, not worshipping the past, but revealing the past, or a more using the past for any particular purpose? And what I'm trying to do is outline some positions and see, using different examples, to determine whether you could talk about homage, appropriation, to what extent the term reception, classical reception, covers all these positions. And particularly what interests me is to look at the political uses of the past. Not only ancient myth, but particularly the political uses of the past. That's why I have used an example like Helen, which refers to Cyprus. My starting point is that when you see studies on the political uses of the past, they tend to use the term appropriation rather than reception. And my argument is that reception could be used to see the dialogue between texts or different media forms like adaptations of classical text to film and so on. But when it comes to ideological or political attitudes or uses of the past, then perhaps the term appropriation might be more interesting. And the other thing which is intrigued me is the term mythical method. Obviously this is T.S. Eliot's term, the mythical method, but it's hardly used outside Greece. But in Greece it's used a great deal. But it's not clear again what we mean by mythical method. Very often they say Seferis' mythical method. But what is a mythical method? And what is this kind of dialogue between contemporaneity and antiquity Eliot used to talk about? And it seems to me that when you have a conversation between the classical or any past and the present, where the emphasis lies, is it, I mean, you could talk about the dialogue of texts, you could talk about the dialogue of a text and perhaps a film, but when it comes to the dialogue between the past and the present, is it possible to have a dialogue? Or perhaps the emphasis will be more on the past or more on the present? And these are questions that I was thinking about, and I was trying to come up with some answers. Obviously it's very difficult to have a kind of a model to develop, but it seems to me that always the modern Greek poets are trying to converse with the past. But is this conversation just a conversation, or it involves putting more emphasis on the present or the past? And looking at Seferis and Ritus, I thought that perhaps Seferis is adopting a kind of archetypal conception of the past, that the past in different forms is manifested in the present. Whereas Ritsos is trying to see places the emphasis for ideological and political reasons on the present.
Well, I've always found it fascinating and, in a sense, rather shocking that Ritsos, turns the beautiful Helen old, and I think this is sort of a symbol almost of his approach. Certainly not a reverent approach. Do you see why you think appropriation has perhaps more meaning in his case? Appropriation, though, often is associated with some very negative case studies as well, such as sort of fascist appropriations of the classical past. Obviously, Ritsos is not doing that, he's doing something very different. But how can we distinguish what he is doing, which is political, from something that is mining the past for quite a, if you like, a dark purpose?
Yes, I mean, obviously, some argue that the term reception is rather passive, because you receive something. And appropriation is a more dynamic term. I mean, it has been used for fascist appropriations, but what I'm interested in is to see this kind of dynamic and more active appropriation of the past for a certain purpose. And I think that's why if you've got a feminist reading of a text and so on, again, you could say it's not a reception as such, but you're using a perspective in order to appropriate the term. Perhaps we can find another term, but because it has been suggested, I'm using that term. It's just to show that reception and appropriation in different areas is something, it's not the same. On the other hand, I mean, what is interesting is that we have got so many papers on Ritsos. And I think that tells us something. And I mean, that's the interesting thing, is why we have got so many papers focusing on different aspects, using different methodologies and so on. So, although Ritsos came to the classical past rather belatedly, it's quite interesting in the last few years there are more papers on Ritsos than in other points.
Well, perhaps I think are we a bit more open than we used to in terms of how accepting we are of more creative, if you like, transformations of the classics. Some time ago, the critique was, oh, this isn't as it was in the source text, etc., etc. But now people have, I think, moved beyond that point and are being much more accepting, much more open to radical reinterpretations of the classics and see their value.
Yes, indeed, and I mean that shows the relevance of classics. It's that classics is not just to try to find traces of a classical text in a modern text. This is a kind of old-fashioned, but to show why the classical myths, the classical texts, and so on are relevant, even in this kind of radical transformation. And perhaps that radical transformation shows that classics is still relevant today. And I mean, that's the challenge, to show that by reinventing or appropriating or transforming a classical text, you make it more contemporary and more relevant to the present day. And I think this is a great opportunity for classics, but also, as I have argued some years ago, that even for modern Greek studies offers an opportunity to engage with a growing area of studies, which is classical reception.
Well, let's seize the day then. And on that positive note, thank you very much indeed,
You're
Professor
welcome.
Tziovas.